My partner did not believe you when, on our last episode, you named a term that West Australians used to use for Eastern Staters.
I saw that. I saw that she didn't believe me, and I was like, Marin, you do not think that Ben Ainsley, well, actually, to be fair, Ben Ainsley would totally do that. Would just lie about something and just sell it. So, fair. That's a fair thing.
T'othersiders. T'othersiders is a real term.
Yep, it was a thing.
Hello and welcome to Because Language, a show about linguistics, the science of language. I'm Daniel Midgley. And with me now, the man who, just like me, got his dream job and found out that it kind of sucked. So now he's here doing this with me. It's Ben Ainsley.
Welcome to Daniel and Ben presents We Couldn't Do Other Things, so here we are.
It's called Choices. Today's show's called Choices.
Two white guys and mediocrity. The show.
We always fail upward.
Yeah. Oh dear, it's gotten too real. Okay, hey Daniel, let's address the much less significantly shaped creature than an elephant in the room. Hedvig's not here. She's over. She's gallivanting across the UK doing fun stuff.
Yes, she's doing fun, very urgent stuff also, and that's not surprising with the publication of Gram Bank.
Ooh.
You've heard of Gram Bank? Been hearing a lot about it?
This is her work.
It's a massive new database about grammatical structures in many, many languages. You know, we've often looked at WALS, the World Atlas of Linguistic Structures, and that is wonderful, and that is still going on, but Gram Bank in many ways supersedes it. We're going to find out from Hedvig about how it works and what it is, but the short version is you can find out, hey, what languages around the world have an inclusive we and an exclusive we? What languages mark gender on their pronouns, and so on and so forth. So,
look, don't ever tell her I said this, but it turns out she might actually be, like, good at this stuff.
I think she might be a big deal. She's the first author. What the heck?
It's so easy to forget, I think, as you and me, because we often, and if she does listen to this, I hope she doesn't interpret that as like, because she comes across so stupid most of the time.
We don't think that you're important or anything.
No. It's just that, like, so much of what we do, especially the stuff that doesn't make it into the show, is just like shit-talking pop culture and other things. And one, being myself, can fall into the trap of forgetting that Hedvig is actually very good at what she does, and she has a job and it does things and it makes things. Like, her labor is productive. And so it's really exciting to see that, like, there's a little bit of that, like, oh, our nerd went out there into the world and did really cool things.
She was the superhero all along.
Yeah. I mean, no one would question that she's way cooler and more competent than both you and I.
Oh, I know that, but I wasn't expecting, Hildegard et al. With such a large and talented group of owls. It's amazing.
Well, we look forward to having her back on the next show. Hopefully soon we're going to actually be able to dig fully into her project, which I'm sure she will find horrendously uncomfortable to be the topic in her own podcast. But before we get to that, shall we do a show and find out what's been going on in the world of linguistics in the week gone past?
Hang on, we're totally not ready for that bit yet.
Oh, God, what do you have now?
Also, later on, I'm going to be talking to Jack Grieve about his new book, The Language of Fake News.
That is very exciting.
It is exciting, and yet, in some ways, fake news seems like a weird topic or like an old topic. Like, it really takes me back.
I don't want to be that guy, but I feel like with all of the AIs doing the stuff, like, surely this stuff is going to be getting super mega ultra turbocharged now.
That is what I thought, and I'm looking forward to asking him about that. How would you spot fake news, or how do you spot fake news in your life, Ben?
Well, I mean, look, credit to people who buy into fake news or like to defend the people that we might look at and think of as like stupid idiots for a second. One of the problems with spotting fake news, I believe, is that so much of our news is now sort of putting itself forward in the cloak of fake news. Do you know what I mean by that?
Not really.
So, like, once upon a time, in the ancient and distant past, the news was really boring. It was the boring thing.
Yeah.
Right? You're old. You must remember this time, right?
It was not entertainment.
You remember a time when 60 Minutes was considered like good, hard-hitting investigative journalism.
Oh dear. It was very serious, It was
right.
And the more serious it was, the better it felt about itself.
And I don't want to give, like fucking 60 Minutes or whatever too much like credit that it doesn't deserve. I'm sure it still suffered from some of the same issues of like institutional bias and people in privilege who have too much power and sway and all that kind of stuff. That definitely would have existed back in the day, no question. But news was like grown-up business, and it certainly wasn't designed to be entertaining. Here in Australia, our 3 broadcast channels, the commercial broadcast channels, Channel 7, Channel 9, and Channel 10, so creatively named.
I know.
Their journalism ran at a loss, and it was like the standard or the badge of their organization, right?
Yes.
Like it was the thing that you had that you were proud of that did good, serious work. And fuck that's gone, right? Like I think we can just say well and truly in the mainstream, that kind of news more or less doesn't exist anymore.
They really did sort of gatekeep. And now there are so many other sources of news that you can go to, and it's entertaining. I have family members who are like, well, that awful channel, at least it's a bit of fun, right? It's entertaining. The other news just makes you feel bad about yourself, like you have something to do. You have to do something.
I have to talk to my students about this quite a lot because of, like what I do for a job. And the way I describe it is that like journalism should be like eating your vegetables. Right?
Yeah.
It's necessary. It's really important. And you're probably not going to like it the most, right?
Yeah.
And I just yearn, like, I'm old guy yelling at clouds. I fully understand that. But I yearn for a time when everyone just understood that, like, the news is boring and sensible and we have to consume it anyway.
Yes, because it's full of fiber, right?
Yeah, exactly, right? But now it's just whoever... And it's not just that whoever shouts the loudest gets heard. I don't think that's purely what's going on. There are still news organizations that are trying really hard to do good work, but even public broadcasters like the BBC and the ABC, they are groaning under the weight of this like attention economy. And so when I said that a lot of real news is dressing itself up as fake news, is that like a large number of these news institutions find themselves having to ferociously compete for the attention of people that is split between 8 different screens and 115 different apps, and they have to somehow try and cut through that noise. And for the most part, it seems like even serious news institutions are doing that with clickbaity titles and, like the hallmarks of like crap fake news.
There's also this thing that people are doing where they're saying, well, bias exists everywhere, which is true. And this station is really biased. But hey, the serious news folks, they've got their biases too. So really it's all just the same and I can watch whatever makes me feel good.
Look, I know you agree with me and we're just 2 guys agreeing with each other on a podcast, but I find that argument especially specious.
Yes.
Right? Like it's at its best, it's deeply ignorant, and at its worst, it's deliberately misinterpreting and misunderstanding what is actually at work, right? If someone can look me in the eye and say Fox News is just as biased as MSNBC, but in a different direction, I cannot respect that person's opinion. I cannot.
Yes, it's a phony equivalence, and it just shows that they do not understand what is going on and the purposes for which fake news is intended to work. I guess maybe we'll do some educating on this show. Maybe I'll get educated by Jack Grieve, who's been studying this for a while. So we'll be talking about his new book, The Language of Fake News.
Now, before we get... no, there's more. Daniel,
plug.
Will you let me fucking segue to the news already?
No, because we have to do a plug. Plug is what's next. Our latest bonus episode was a mailbag episode in which we tackled all of your questions. Like, why do we say, here you go, when you give someone something?
Mailbags are the best episodes. They're so fun.
Yeah, they're great. We asked, how can you reduce something to something? Why do we say, the thing is that? And why are there some contractions that just look plain strange when we write them? So, if you want to hear that bonus episode and all the others as soon as they come out, you can become patron at the listener level. Depending on your level, you can get shout-outs, mail-outs, bonus episodes. Every patron gets access to our Discord server. The whole gang is there, sharing articles, information, words, Wordle results, and just having a lot of fun. We would love to see you there. So head on over to patreon.com/becauselangpod. And thanks to all our patrons.
Okay, can I do it now? Can I do it?
Do it. Yep, do it.
I can do it?
Ready.
It probably won't make the cut, but I just need the listeners now to know I've tried to segue to the news like 4 times and Daniel shut me down each time. So, Daniel.
Yes.
Unless you speak now or forever hold your peace, can you tell me, please, sir, what has been happening in the world of linguistics in the week gone past?
There's been a lot of banning of words, banning of language, a lot of official action taken on language, a lot of language policy.
Okay.
More than I've noticed for a long time.
So banning. So this, when I hear this word, I need some clarifying context, right? Because these days when stuff gets banned, I immediately think of like don't say gay bills and like books about being alive and trans not being able to be read and stuff like that. Is that what we're talking about?
I mean, there is a lot of that going on. Right-wing authoritarians are trying to put rules on what we're allowed to say and do and think.
Okay.
And then they dress themselves up with the Party of Liberty or something.
Yeah.
Some shit like that.
We're all about ultimate freedom. Oh, cool. Can I be a woman? Fuck no. Fuck, that is the wrong kind of freedom. Yeah. God.
So I want to talk about things that aren't the USA for a while.
Okay. That's fun.
The person who alerted us to this is Catherine Cellier-Smart at smart_translate. This is about Russia banning foreign words. So this is an article from Reuters. Apparently the Duma, the lower legislative assembly, adopted a bill that forbids the use of foreign words in Russian unless they don't have a native Russian word.
Right. So to clarify, this would be like, say, in French, for instance, the French might refer to hamburger, right? And the Russians are basically saying like fucking none of that unless there is no Russian version.
Right, because it's all degenerate West nonsense and it'll destroy the country.
Yeah.
The text
that country that has so often fallen under the sway of the West and is a notorious like domino that falls so readily.
Yeah, it's so susceptible to Western influence.
Certainly hasn't been the thing that broke the back of like 7 different land invasions. Anyway, yeah,
well,
cool.
It is like that, isn't it? It's like a country's last desperate gasp. It's like some kind of extinction burst when things aren't going well in other ways, but they can't address the real problem. Then it's like, quick. Let's do something hamburger with language. Yeah.
So what are some of the ones they want to do away with?
Well, that's the thing. The articles that I've read are very vague, and it doesn't actually have a mention of what the words are.
Okay, so it's a dog whistle.
There's going to be a list, but it didn't get signed into law with this.
There's going to be a list.
There's going to be a list.
Oh my god.
The text of the law actually says and this is in translation, when using Russian as the state language of the Russian Federation, it is not allowed to use words and expressions that do not correspond to the norms of modern Russian, with the exception of foreign words.
That do not correspond to the norms of modern Russian. That's a pretty loose law.
I'm a little bit worried about the norms of modern Russian, but anyway. Okay, so that's one.
Yep.
But less expectedly, Italy is doing the same kind of thing. This one was suggested by Diego and also Andy from Logophilius, who says, I'm sure this is already on your news radar for the show, but I just wanted to make sure it got to y'all. Right-wing politicians in Italy are trying to enact legal punishments for mispronouncing Italian words or using non-Italian languages in official documents.
Mispronouncing words?
In official documents, yes. So let's talk about mispronouncing.
I hope the tourists are aware of this because, damn, we do some bad work when we go there.
How do you say the bread that's been brushed with butter? Actually, you know what?
No, I can do this.
I'm so uncool. I don't even know if that's right.
That's focaccia.
Not that thing.
Oh,
Oh, why? Were you worried that people would say focaccia or something?
I don't know. No. As in, like, I thought that's the thing you were referring to.
No, I'm referring to the thing that starts out with brush.
Oh. Pana de casa?
The word is BRUSCHETTA. How would you say that word?
Sorry. Bruschetta.
Okay. Now, do you have any strong feels about that? Because you're saying I will be flabbergasted if I am pronouncing that correctly. No, that's actually the way that an Italian speaker would do it. And in fact,
Bruschetta.
Sometimes people get on other people's case for saying bruschetta.
Right?
Because it looks like bruschetta to me, but anyway.
And I will be completely honest. I am utterly convinced there have been many instances in my life where I've said bruschetta instead of bruschetta.
Yeah, me too. CNN has reported, and I don't know if this just originates with them or goes back to the original law, but CNN has reported that pronouncing, for example, bruschetta as bruschetta will get you in trouble to the tune of probably about 100,000 euros, which is about the same amount of US dollars, in official communications.
Oh, okay. So, like, if you were to release,
if you were to pronounce it in official.
So first of all, it can't be printed, obviously, right? So it has to be some sort of broadcast.
Yes. And if a broadcaster says it wrong.
What? That's so stupid.
This is new legislation introduced by Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's Brothers of Italy party.
I'm gonna. Can I guess?
Doesn't
Daniel,
raise any red flags there.
Can I just, even before I heard the name of the party, I would have guessed, is this a sort of fervently right-leaning organization politically?
Well, yes, it is, Ben. How did you know?
Because it seems like, and I would love to actually talk to, or maybe read some books on this, like, why the fuck does the right keep doing this? Why? Like, when has the left ever gone, you better pronounce the words right? I guess the right would probably say something like, oh, well, you all say that we can't say, like, the R word anymore, and you all say we can't say the N word, or something like that. Like, maybe that's their version of this.
It's the censorious left. But you've got to remember that every accusation is an admission, right? Project.
Yeah, like any good narcissist.
Like, I don't know of any lefty person. The closest thing I can think of is when Hawaii decided to try rewriting laws so that the word Oriental was replaced with Asian or something like that.
Okay. That's linguistic change, though.
Yep.
Like, and this seems. Yeah. I guess the Russian thing is like, don't use foreign words is also kind of a version of linguistic. I just wonder, like, don't they ever get tired of being on the wrong side of history?
Yeah, they're on the wrong side of language change. I mean, this is a typical response for a government in crisis that refuses to face real problems and decides to invent imaginary ones so that people will like.
So that their base will, instead of going, hey, the cost of living has gone up by like 600%, will be like, it is bruschetta. I'm glad you're moving on this.
Exactly. Also in Italian legislation, banning lab meat.
Oh, okay. So this comes back. We've mentioned this on the show a couple of times. So basically there is a new suite of meat products that are meat, but that have been made from a non-animal source.
That are actually from an animal source, like in vitro meat, the kind that you like growing steak in big sheets.
Yes. Sorry. What I meant by that is no living animal was first born and then killed to acquire said meat.
Yes.
And so I'm guessing this is kind of similar to the whole, like, you can't call it dairy, you can't call it milk, it's got to be nut fluid, you can't call it champagne if it's from the Champagne region. They're trying to protect their meat production.
I just think it's interesting how often the meat issue and the naming of meat issue just go right together. I'm counting the number of times. So this is another one. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Ukraine.
Oh, okay. What are they banning?
President Zelensky has signed a law. This one's from the New York Times. You can read the whole article on our website, becauselanguage.com. Signed a law that does two things. Number one, bans Russian place names.
Oh.
Place names that, quote, perpetuate, promote, or symbolize the occupying state or its notable, memorable, historical, and cultural places, cities, dates, events. And, quote, its figures who carried out military aggression against Ukraine. So they're pulling down statues of Catherine the Great, pulling down Russian icons and things.
Right.
And number 2, makes knowledge of Ukrainian language and history a requirement for citizenship.
Oh.
Making a knowledge of Ukrainian language and history a requirement for citizenship.
Now, Daniel, how how au fait are you with the linguistic situation in Ukraine?
I know that about 1 in 3 people in Ukraine, however you define it, speaks Russian.
Right, but does 1 in 1 people speak Ukrainian?
No, the Wikipedia page has it down as 94%.
Okay.
But there is a shift. It's very interesting, actually. It seems that a lot of people who are outraged by Russian aggression are shifting away from Russian toward Ukrainian as a way of resistance or defiance. So that's going on.
That certainly isn't surprising. I've got to be honest, I am a little bit surprised at the sort of the level of what Zelensky's trying to do here. If a third of your country speaks a language, like I don't think that third of the country are all like sort of guerrilla warfare, terrorist insurgents. It's a lot. That's a lot of your population.
That's a lot of people. And there's a reason why it's a lot, because Russians have been shipped in so that then they vote for Russian practices. And there has been...
Look, I have no doubt of that.
Yep.
But the last thing I want to sound like is any kind of Russian apologist, because I'm not.
No.
What it makes me think of is Finland.
Finland?
Right? Yes. So Swedish is an official language in Finland.
Okay.
And it's not because the Swedes are next door and they like coming a lot and the Finns thought, oh, this will be nice. It is. Finland was hundreds of years ago a colony of Sweden. Since then, Swedish has been a minority language within Finland, but it is definitely a language that is like first language in the homes of the people who speak it and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
I feel uncomfortable with the idea of singling a group of people out based on the language that they speak, because yes, language can signify identity, but through the lottery of birth, a lot of these people have just been born into Russian-speaking families, love the Ukraine, I'm sure, hate what Russia is doing and all those sorts of things. And I don't know, it's complex, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say. And I don't love the idea of language policing, broadly speaking.
I would be freaking out if Australia did this. Okay. Like, right. I understand what's going on. Yep. And I am not a party to this, and it's not up to me, and I don't have any skin in the game, and I know that. But, I mean, we did a story, didn't we, when MP Alan Tudge was trying to make English a requirement, like an IELTS score of 6 to become a citizen, and he only got 3 tries. I was pounding the table. I really, I mean, quite literally.
Look, I think this is an opportunity where Zelensky or like whatever Ukrainian leader is going to be in power at whatever point can turn around and say, in this country, we speak Russian, we speak Ukrainian, we are one people, and what we will not tolerate, no matter what language anyone speaks, is coming into our country and trying to take what is ours. This is our land, no matter what language you speak. You can speak Nigerian for all I care. And in the Ukraine, or not that they would say
not
in Ukraine.
The Ukraine.
No, in Ukraine.
Thank you.
We are us. Yeah. And that is independent of the language we speak. And it doesn't mean we should ignore our history, but it also doesn't mean we should try and homogenize ourselves to something that we're not, right? Just as, like you said, just as if Australians tried to do it, we would be like, I don't fucking think so.
Yeah, well, okay, so let's look at the difference and why I'm a little more comfortable with Zelensky doing this than, say, Alan Tudge. Number one, the presence of Russian language and Russian history are being taken by Russia as a justification for their aggression. Okay, so that's number one. And number two, when in Australia you get people saying, hey, those people, we need to make English the official language and, we need to taper down support for people who don't speak English. That's like white people imagining that those foreigners are trying to come in and invade. But in the case of Ukraine, those foreigners
they have come
really are trying to come in and invade.
Look, like I said, neither of us have skin in the game, and we should probably just move on. The sort of my final thought on the matter is that's fine, and I totally get that, except for the fact that a third of the country spoke Russian even before Russia started shipping people into like Crimea and all that sort of thing, right? Like, how long a lens do you want to take? Because I'm pretty sure at 50 years, 100 years, 150 years, 200 years, Ukraine had a pretty decent chunk of Russian speakers in there. And that's longer than Australia's been a country.
Yep. We have to remember that this is, once again, a natural response to aggression. Yes. In peacetime, it is regrettable. There are factors that might make it understandable, and I attempt to understand.
Yes.
Okay. Let's go on to our next one. This one was suggested by Aristemo about the word Latinx.
So I've always wondered, so Latinx, not Latinx.
Okay. Now, do you know how ignorant I am about this topic and how much I should probably shut up? I don't know. I've only ever seen it written.
Well, I have to imagine you pronouncing it right because it's a transposition of Latina or Latino. So I would imagine Latinx.
I was just taking the O and the A and replacing it with an X and pronouncing it straight up. But please, anyone correct me if I'm getting it wrong. This is some action by Representative Maria Elvira Salazar in Florida, Republican of Florida, to ban the use of the term Latinx in public executive branch documents. And the context is that the word Latinx has popped up in some government documents. So Salazar says, the Biden administration is waging a woke crusade on Latino identity and the Spanish language. We cannot allow the Biden administration to use White House communications to attack our language and impose progressive ideology on our people. Apparently imposing regressive ideology is okay in Florida, but just not progressive.
Look, first of all, I would very much like to question the idea that the Biden administration even had anything to do with this. If it's government documents in the Florida legislature,
or it might not have been. It could be out of the White House.
Okay.
I find that possible.
So if it is out of the White House or if it's not out of the White House, the only thing I would say about this is I will completely and forever accept this coming from Latinx authors. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I see what you did there.
If this is just like some random white guy who saw a blog post and was like, "Oh, I'm going to do this," and they didn't think any more about it than that, I also would say that that's probably a questionable instance of it being used.
Yep.
But if the people who are writing these so-called official documents are themselves Latino, Latina, or Latinx, then I'm all for it, obviously, because that's the word that group of people want to use to refer to themselves, and it doesn't seem a lot more complicated than that.
You know what I've noticed also? A lot of people prefer Latine because... So my sense that of what I'm reading from just bopping around is that a lot of people do use Latinx. It's very important for some people for their identity. A lot of people don't like it. A lot of people prefer Latine.
Latine, Latinae?
No, Latine, just not Latino, not Latina, okay. Latine with a letter E.
Okay.
Because it seems to conform more closely with the way a Spanish speaker would say that. But our pal Old Ann on Discord points out, I'm just going to quote here, from someone following U.S. politics closely, this is performative wedge politics. Polls show many or most Latino, Latina, Hispanic people don't like the term Latinx, so it is being branded as woke and used as a political cudgel. End of quote.
Okay.
Despite the fact that some people are using it for themselves.
Right. So
this is one of those things that's going to have to work through the system. Do you remember how he called Sweden once?
Oh, no. Oh, God, we've been doing this show a long time. Refresh my memory.
There was a thing where you could call Sweden.
Oh, that's right.
There was a volunteer. We called Sweden and we asked the nice volunteer what she thought of hen, the invented, all words are invented, the neo-pronoun that it's non-binary in Swedish. And she said, I didn't like it at all. But I know a few Swedish people, 7 or 8 years later, who did feel that way, and now they either don't care or they've become enthusiastic users. So these things work through the system. Words duke it out. They'll get through it.
And look, maybe in the sort of in the sausage factory of linguistic churn, Latinx will fall away because it's kind of people in that community find it kind of clumsy and a bit sort of blocky, and it doesn't flow, and it's not very nice to say.
Yeah.
This is all just me hypothesizing. I don't believe those things necessarily. And Latine might be the thing that like settles in as the sort of genderless pronoun.
Yeah, maybe.
And cool, like great.
Yeah, we're interested in what our listeners have to say. So if you have any input on any of this, let me just finish up by saying, I've never seen it like this. I haven't seen it this much for a long time. A lot of language policy around fear of an external factor, sometimes for good reasons, sometimes for bad reasons. But I just feel like banning words is so chuggy. I mean,
oh no, Daniel, Daniel.
No, but that's what this word was invented for. It's just blur. I don't know if you're aware of this, Daniel, but by saying that, you mark yourself as chuggy. I know. I'm self-chugging.
Okay.
I'm a self-chugging linguist. It's true.
Can I share with you for just a moment, and this might make it onto the show and it might not. Okay. I over the last sort of like, I'm going to say 5 or 6 years, I have had to grieve the death of my old sort of teaching self, who was young enough to be able to sort of semi-authentically relate to high schoolers.
Yes.
And unfortunately, and this is not me doing like performative Grumpy Ben stuff. This is just like genuine, real talk vulnerability Ben. I'm now genuinely sort of, like I'm nearly 40. I have properly moved out of the phase of my life where I can authentically relate to the young people in that way. Which I don't think that means like I'm a terrible teacher now or anything, but it just means, so by way of illustrating this, the other day I was talking about how different groups of people can be materialistic in different ways, and I referenced that farmers in Australia can be really, really materialistic around a brand called R.M. Williams, where jeans and boots and hats and stuff can cost like hundreds and hundreds of dollars. And a lot of the kids in the class looked at me kind of funny, and I said, well, like for farmers, this is their Supreme or their Yeezys or something. And the looks these kids gave me.
What?
You're saying
that was
what?
My impression as well.
So
I
you're
don't know
saying
this.
What, Daniel? Because you too are old and irrelevant, because both Supreme and Yeezys are like fucking yesterday's news, bro.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Both those things are like, they're like chuggy. They're really dated things, and when we say them, we just out ourselves as deeply uncool human beings.
I thought you were going to say something like that R.M. Williams was like the new on trend or something.
No. So just
but yeah,
for our listeners' sake, at least here in WA, the more relevant brands now for young people that I could have used would be something like butter.
Thank you.
There you go.
Wow. Okay.
And I don't mean butter, the condiment. I mean, there is a clothing streetwear brand called Butter.
I can't believe the kids are wearing butter these days.
Oh, I don't.
What's it all coming to?
Bloody hell, mate. I'm not prepared for it. Have we got a final news story?
Let's finish up with Australia's fastest growing language. Take a guess, Ben. What's Australia's fastest growing language? It's the fastest growing. It's racing up the charts. It's now at number 5, according to our last census. But what is it?
The fastest growing language is now at number 5. Okay, so let's work our way down the list. English is obviously...
We got English at number 1.
Number 1.
I'll give you that one.
Okay. Second would be, I'm going to go with Mandarin.
Correct.
Okay. Third, we're getting into migrant populations now, Vietnamese.
That's number 4.
Oh, okay. So between Mandarin...
Sorry, I got to say, that's Mandarin. I'm excluding English from this list. Excludes English. Okay, so Mandarin
is number 1 then.
Number 1. Vietnamese is number 3.
3. Gotcha. Okay, so between Mandarin and Vietnamese is either going to be Italian or Greek. I'm going to go with Italian.
And
no. Oh no. Okay. Arabic.
Number 2. Very good. Okay. And number 4?
Okay, number 4.
You're doing really well.
I'm guessing it was neither Italian nor Greek because you would have given it to me. So,
correct.
It's definitely not going to be Spanish.
It's an Asian language.
Okay. It's not going to be Japanese.
No.
It's not going to be Thai. Oh, hang on. Is it Cantonese?
It is Cantonese.
Oh,
Damn,
there we
Ben.
go.
You're a freaking
for a
genius.
second, I was doing the dumb white boy thing of thinking that all the languages in China were kind of the same, which is stupid because they're not.
Because they're not.
Okay,
I
so
don't know
number
if I would
five.
do as well as you had. So number 5.
Number 5.
It's kind of out of left field.
Okay.
This language is the 5th most commonly spoken language at home other than English. It's,
no, don't give it away.
Okay.
Jeez, Daniel,
Gosh,
come on. Number 5, racing up the charts.
I'll give you the country if you want.
No, don't you dare.
You'll still
don't
have
want
one
your
to choose
guinnies.
from. Okay.
Are you trying to get out of here, Daniel? Are you looking at the clock? Is that what's going
You got
on
a
here?
catch? No.
Okay, 10 seconds or less. I'm gonna go with Osa.
No, good try. It's a language of, here's the country. It's a language of India, but it's not Hindi.
Okay, Urdu.
Nope.
Oh,
Telugu? Nope.
Bengali.
Nope.
Oh,
It's tough.
Punjabi.
Correct. It is Punjabi.
Wow.
Yeah. It's more popular in Australia than it is in India.
Oh, but hang on though. That's because Punjabi doesn't just come from India though.
Yes, okay, that's correct.
In the census, and I think we probably need to say that in relation to Punjabi because it probably informs why so many people in Australia are speaking Punjabi because it is spoken in Pakistan, it is spoken in Afghanistan. If you believe that Kashmir is a place, it's spoken there as well. So yeah, like it's a pretty widely spoken language.
The article from the abc.net.au from Alex Brewster points out that it is very, very popular in Australia, one of the top languages, and yet is not taught in schools. And there's a number of vox pops, a number of interviews from folks who say, well, hey, this is important to us and we would like to see it in schools.
Damn right.
And let's remember that 1 in 4 of us in Australia speaks another language at home. And for school kids, that's 1 in 3. I think if we want to promote multilingualism, school classes are fine, but a lot of people never remember them, which is fine too, because I only remember a little bit of chemistry, and the important thing is that I remember a little bit of chemistry. But if we want to support students with those languages, a good way to do it is to support those languages, is to support students who have that language in their background so that we can be more fully multilingual in Australia.
I don't have data in front of me to back this up, but I'm just going to sort of intuit my way to a comparative analysis here. If we have data that shows very, very clearly that Indigenous students all around the world do much better if their language is supported in that school, then surely that is true for other languages too.
I think so. And just the pursuit of multilingualism is a wonderful thing.
In a supposedly multicultural country.
Ben and I know that we are a couple of white guys spouting off about language. We will immediately defer to anyone who has a view on this, and we want to hear it. We'll read your comments at the end, so get them to us. hello@becauselanguage.com.
Please critique us. We welcome it.
It's time to play Related or Not.
Oh, this is going to be a really boring round because I can't compete with Hedvig.
But you can compete with me because Diego thought of this one. And
so you haven't looked at the answer?
I have looked at what I did was, and this is what I always do.
Oh, we're doing the honor system?
So that we can both play. I looked at his 2 words without knowing the answer, gave my answer, and I'm going to read to you kind of what I wrote. And then I looked up the answer, so now I know.
Okay, that's fun. I believe you. I trust you. You're a good guy.
Thank you. You're a good guy too, Ben. Let's hear it.
Untrue.
Stop stalling. But the words are quest and question.
Oh, I thought you were going to say request. Okay, quest and question.
Dang. Okay, looking that one up too.
Okay, quest and question.
Why is there a re?
Gut feels straight out of the gate. Yes, related. Now I've just got to justify why. Okay. Can I ask, Daniel? No, I can't ask. I'll ask afterwards. I've got to give my answer because otherwise I'm cheating. Quest and question are related because they just are very, very close. Like quest is such a sort of particular phoneme collection, and they're both spelt the same way. I guess they could have been modified to be spelt the same way later and come from different spellings. Gut feels related. Go.
Okay. My immediate response was yes, because I know that question is French, question. And I thought with that QU beginning, quest has to be the same.
Oh, now you've fucked me now. I reckon I'm wrong because you've gone question, and I know que in a lot of the Romance languages is like huh or like what. So question is like I assume is like huh-ness.
I'm positive those are not related. Anyway, yeah. Okay.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay, but then I thought that maybe the qua sound or the kva sound could be Norse. Maybe it was like related to west, like you're going west. But then I couldn't think of any actual words that were qua or kva. So now I'm back to thinking yes. Okay, so my answer was yes, they are related.
And?
They are related.
Oh, good. We both get a point. Yay. And Hedvig just inherently doesn't because boo.
There's one abstention. So here's the story. There was once a Latin word quarere, which meant to ask or to seek, which sounds a lot like query, doesn't it?
Yes.
And when you turn it into a noun, it became quaestio, an act of seeking. And by the 1300s, we had question. But while that was going on, quaerere was moving on in a different form. It turned into medieval Latin questa, which was a search or an inquiry. Probably when you're hunting, especially, that was your quest. It turned to Old French quest. By the way, it probably was pronounced with a qu sound because we see it spelled QW in English.
Oh.
And then by the 1300s, we had quest. So quest and question are related. And by the way, I did just look it up, and request is related to quest and question. The re is simply again.
There we go.
Yay.
We weren't right for the right reasons, but we were right.
And that's all that matters. If you would like to sponsor an episode by sponsoring the game related or not, you're welcome to tender a request. Ask us a question about it. And if your product doesn't suck and we don't hate you, then we will entertain your quest. So big thanks to Diego for giving us the game. I'm talking to Dr. Jack Grieve, professor of corpus linguistics at the University of Birmingham, Turing Fellow at the Alan Turing Institute, and along with Helena Woodfield, he is the author of The Language of Fake News. Jack, thanks for coming on and having a chat with me today.
Thanks for having me in, Daniel.
Tell me something about language that you think is really, really cool.
Well, I think it's cool just, how intricately language is used in the real world, like reflects the sort of context in which people are communicating, the purposes they have for communicating, and the social situation in which they're communicating and their social background. So I think it's pretty neat how, despite the fact that we see all this variation in languages of the world, and language seems really kind of complex in lots of ways, that and kind of maybe hard to understand why it is the way it is, that when we look in detail at language used in the real world, just how fine-tuned it is for communicating in these specific contexts in these really specific ways.
Man, I feel that way too. And you've come up with a lot of specific ways in which people change their language when they're doing something real as opposed to when they're doing something fake. And we're going to be talking about those.
Yeah. Or at least in this case, this one guy.
One guy.
We know people really fine-tune their language, both consciously and subconsciously. But I think it's the way you put it made it sound pretty active, and I think that's largely correct. That a lot of this is done intentionally, or at least reflects intent. And I think that's something that isn't always appreciated, is often denied even.
Yeah. The guy that we're talking about is, of course, New York Times reporter Jason Blair, who is the subject of your book, The Language of Fake News, because he was sometimes lying and he was sometimes telling the truth, and we can examine the difference.
Yeah, that's right.
Before we get to him, this is something that I said to Ben at the top of the show. We first became aware of fake news right around 2015, 2016.
Yeah.
The phrase, anyway, because it first described like news that wasn't real, intended to deceive. But then there was an orange guy who said fake news is, whatever I don't agree with or whatever I want to ignore.
Yeah.
And that was a long time ago. That was like 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
And what I said to Ben was, I feel like this is a bit nostalgic. I feel like this is something that we were focused on for a while. Are we still focusing on fake news? What's the story about fake news in 2023? And by the way, this is not a knock on how long it took you to come out with the book or anything like that.
Yeah, well, but partially that is true. It took us a while to come up with this book. It didn't take us a while to. It didn't take us that long to write it. It took it a while to publish it and get it accepted.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Fake news, definitely pushes back much farther than that too. But you're right. Like around 2016, there was this 2015, 2016 up into the 2016 election, but then also, with Brexit over here. And just lots of stuff like that. It's sort of been something that rose up then. It seems like it still gets a fair bit of discussion, and I imagine as we go back in, it had a lot of discussion through COVID too.
Sure.
With that kind of stuff. So I think it's just sort of one of these things that pops up when there's a lot of like new information flowing around in the news, and where there's lots of debate over what part of it's real. It does certainly seem like, so Jason Blair's back in the early 2000s, which is before the modern rise of fake news, but it does seem like that a lot of it is connected up to kind of the rise of the internet, right? And to people getting their information online and being able to really kind of curate where they get their information from and be able to kind of really focus in on information of a certain type from a certain political standpoint. And so, in 2016, you had, like we say in the book, you had sort of news organizations just like literally arguing over whose news was fake, and that became actually the subject of the news, right? Was covering the fakeness of other news organizations' news, right? It just spirals, right? Where both sides were doing this very, very quickly.
And we're still having that discussion, aren't we? I
think it's just, if you have this like highly polarized news landscape, then it's almost inevitable, right? Because you have different news organizations reporting opposite things, or at least giving opposite opinions on the same piece of news. And it seems like, increasingly more and more opinion, or more and more explicit opinion in the news. And therefore, if that's what the news is doing, then almost all of it's fake from one side's perspective, right?
Yeah, so that discussion is still going on. At the same time, I don't want to both sides this. Like on one side, okay, so I was thinking about, how can we tell if something is fake news? And I thought, I'll friggin' tell you how I know something's fake news. If it comes from this outlet or that outlet or that outlet.
Yeah, sure. But then, I would assume that, almost to be a good purveyor of fake news, you need to, share some real news too, right? Like you sort of undermine your own, even with a dedicated listener base. If you do it too much, I think over time that will really erode away any confidence anyone has in you. Maybe that's not totally true, but I think
you say that.
well, or at least maybe not your most dedicated listeners, but you still, I think any kind of at least pretending to be legitimate news source will need to share real news. And in some sense it might also often be easier to share real news too, right? Like you can just sort of take the news that's out there, don't need to concoct anything.
Yeah, you're right. And, because reality is complex and because you can highlight certain aspects of the news, like sometimes it's not this news outlet is wrong and that news outlet is wrong. And by excluding 3 of them, I can get to 80%. Sometimes it's about stance. Like I don't know what a 15-minute city is. All right. I don't know what that is, but I have seen some really terrible weirdos get very angry about it. And I'm waiting for the day when I have to find out what it is, what a 15-minute city is. But I just know that if somebody is super negative on it, I kind of know that I can avoid them. Or is that being super close-minded of me?
No, I don't. I don't know what a 15-minute city is, but I think I take your point. Yeah, no, I think that's what we do, right? And like if somebody, like in your daily life is lying to you all the time, then you stop listening to anything they say, right? You just sort of. Right. And I think that's fair enough. I think that's the kind of thing that we all do, and that, is probably the main way to combat deception in the news media is to just all of us individually to really be careful and to read these things carefully and to, to make broader calls about the overall news organization. But that said, I think probably in lots of, say, biased news media organizations, which I guess is all of them, but like heavily biased news media organizations, that you do have to be careful that, I mean, you can certainly, as an individual consumer of news, just like tune it all out because you just think that the percentage of real news in there is too low. But on the other hand, if you're trying to like detect actual instances of fake news, or like you're judging this new news organization or something like this, then it is important to try to like disentangle what is real from what is fake, right? I think that is pretty important, and I think that's really tricky if we're just writing off whole news organizations. I mean, that's fair enough as a consumer of news, but not as a way of like finding instances of fake news. In fact, that probably gives you a pretty bad signal.
Okay, well, so in your approach, you've taken a linguistic approach, and in fact, this sentence comes from the book. Fake news is fundamentally a linguistic phenomenon, and its analysis should therefore be grounded in linguistic theory.
Yeah.
That's an interesting view, and I would just like to interrogate that a little bit, because we're talking about source and we're talking about stance, but what led you to the conclusion that this is fundamentally linguistic, and therefore that we can use linguistic techniques to detect it, analyze it? What got you there?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could certainly have news where a picture is a big part of that news, and increasingly those can be easily faked. So I wouldn't want to say that it's like exclusively a linguistic problem, but no. I guess the point I was trying to get to is something like, in general, at least at this point in time, and in probably even more so historically, news always has some kind of linguistic component to it, like some kind of language in it, right? So it's either, text-based news or on the radio or on TV. Yeah. There's usually some kind of language there, especially if it's to be effective. I'm not sure if we would call just like like that doctor picture of the Pope, like floating around the internet as news. I guess it could be. But in general, there is like a textual component so that we can. So once there is a textual component, or a spoken component or a signed component, whatever, then at that point, then we should be able to analyze that. We can analyze it linguistically. And then the argument we try to make in the book is that depending on how you define fake news, that it's really meaningful to analyze it linguistically, like that there is a reason to believe that the language, that the structure of real and fake news will differ in systematic ways and interpretable ways. And we also argue that if you define fake news in other ways, that there really shouldn't be any kind of, or there really is no good explanation for why the language would differ. And so depending on how you define fake news, I think a linguistic analysis, or, if you want, just like any kind of language analysis, including, a machine learning based approach where you're looking at language patterns, should be effective. I don't think it's always the case that it makes sense to say that there'd be linguistic differences between real and fake news. But I think if you define it carefully, then there is a theoretical basis in linguistics to try to see differences there.
And better still, then it becomes tractable because the words are there for you.
Yeah, and I think, the way that we kind of really focus in on is that fake news, really requires intent from the author of the fake news to deceive.
Okay.
That is to say that they that they believe something they believe something different than what they're telling you, and they're telling the reader things that they're not trying to inform them, they're trying to deceive them, and we think that then creates a signal almost necessarily.
Okay, so it's not just that the fake news story is something that turns out to be wrong. It's something that the transmitter believes to be wrong, but they do it anyway for their own purposes.
Well, I think you can define fake news in different ways, and certainly people have, and I'm not saying that, say, someone who fact checks an article and finds out that it is untrue, that we shouldn't call that fake news. But yeah. I don't think there's much reason to suspect that alone would result in some kind of linguistic signal or some variation in linguistic structure that should let us know that it's fake news, right? Like that's what we're trying to make. Like someone else can, fake news is a big concept, and we can certainly include just like any kind of false news in there, any kind of news that turns out to be untrue. But I don't think there's much reason to think that there's a linguistic signal there that distinguishes false news from true news.
So in your analysis, you used the work of Jason Blair, New York Times reporter, who sometimes did true news, sometimes did fake news.
Yeah.
Do you want to walk me through just the circumstances surrounding? I don't want you to, give away the entire book.
Yeah, no, I'm not worried about giving it away. I mean, it's a I mean, so it's a good story. It was back from the early 2000s. Jason Blair was a really young reporter at the New York Times. I think it's fair to say it was a really pressurized time at the New York Times and in news media in general, because this is right around the time that sort of online news is rising. All these newspaper subscription services were falling off, and people were trying to figure out what to do about that. We already had at that point sort of the rise of sort of, alternative news sources like blogs and things like that. This is before social media, but it's not before blogs, mailing lists and things like that.
Yeah. And
so in that context, this young reporter, Jason Blair, starts working for the New York Times, getting quite a few corrections, issues like that, but moves up despite it and starts increasingly doing really high-profile reporting. It was around the time of the DC sniper stuff, when there was someone out on the kind of interstates around Washington, D.C. It turned out to be not a father-son pair, but a man and a younger man pair who were out shooting people. And so he was set down to cover that. This is also around the time of the Iraq War, so he was also covering various people's families. So he wasn't in Iraq; he was in the U.S., but covering soldiers' families and things like that.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's basically what he was doing, and he was just out supposedly reporting across the Northeast on these two stories. And at some point, someone he once worked with, someone who once interned at the New York Times with him, who was a reporter in San Antonio, noticed that he had essentially plagiarized her story, was giving these sort of details about a military family whose son had gone missing in Iraq, and was sort of, she noticed that it was describing the same inside of the house and stuff like this. And I think there was also then some errors in there as well, if I recall. Like they were giving both information that was in that story, but also unimportant information that the reporter knew was untrue. And then this got revealed to the Washington Post, which is the New York Times' rival, and the media reporter there, Howard Kurtz, who's now on Fox News, still around, then broke the story. And then I think it's unclear how public this would have gone without the additional coverage of a competing news organization. But then that really snowballed, and pretty soon they did this big sort of internal investigation at the New York Times, and went through, I think it was about 6 months of his articles, and really checked each one and found that about half of them had been really totally faked, as in either plagiarized, but they were all faked in the sense that these were articles where he was supposed to be, or at least most of them were he was supposed to be on site somewhere, and he never went there. It was then later revealed that he had written these from his apartment in New York City, and that and that he'd really taken advantage of access to all this online news media, right? So, he could read other people's reports. He could do all sorts of things where he didn't have to necessarily experience it himself. He could infer this or take this information off. Yeah, but make it up or plagiarize it, or kind of do a bit of both, right? Kind of collage it all together.
Yeah. And so in your work, you said, okay, I got a bunch of stories from the same author. Some of them were real. Some of them were concocted, or we're calling some real, some fake.
Yeah, yeah.
I just took a look at all the work that I have seen, because we've done on the show lots and lots of stories where people have examined lying.
Yeah.
And gotten people to lie in the lab and see what the language is like. And so I'm going to summarize, I see here in my writing, just when I was going back over my notes, when people are lying, they tend to use fewer first-person pronouns like I or we. So that was one thing in past work. And also they tend to obfuscate more, and I'm not sure what that refers to, maybe more convoluted language or something.
Yeah.
But I wanted to just take a look at some of your results, and we could play a game called What Do You Reckon? Where I just pick out something and then say, what do you reckon? Why was this indicative of lying? Should we go?
Well, I mean, maybe quick though. Like we don't find that with first person pronouns. We certainly find more pronouns in general in the fake. But
Really?
but the argument we make in the book is that we shouldn't expect everyone to lie in the same way, and we should expect the people's lying to reflect the motivation for lying and the circumstances in which they lie. But
Yeah.
we definitely find more pronouns in general in the fake.
Yeah, you're right. On page 45, I see first-person pronouns are up in fake news, contrary to what I just said, and third-person pronouns up in fake news as well. Huh.
Yeah, I mean,
All right.
I wouldn't be too surprised if this shifts for other people. I also wouldn't be too surprised if, what happens in a lab isn't what happens in the real world.
Yeah, true.
The lab itself isn't a neutral context, right? I mean, that's the context in which someone's communicating, and so, in these kind of situations, you're getting a picture of how the specific group of people that you sampled from to bring them into the lab are lying in the lab in this situation.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm happy to play the game.
Okay, let's play the game. You have average word length in this person's stories,
Yep.
higher in his real stories, and his sentences got a lot shorter in the fake stories. What do you reckon?
Yeah, word length short in the fake story. So in general, what we have there is it goes along with the pronoun pattern, and that's that we find basically that all these features that are associated with more informationally dense text, so texts that are really trying to maximize the amount of information that can be put into a text, in this case a newspaper article, that any feature associated with really trying to convey lots of information concisely is more associated with his real news. And I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, for two reasons. The first is that, Jason Blair wasn't lying to try to convince you of some information that he really wanted to convince you of for nefarious purposes, right? Like he wasn't lying to enact any kind of social change or to scam anyone. He was rushed, right? And he was, I mean, the economic change he was trying to do was his own, right? He was trying to up his productivity and make articles that would move him up through the organization and satisfy his bosses. And so in those cases, right, the whole problem he had was a lack of information. He had to write all these articles, but he hadn't actually done enough legwork to get the information. So then when he starts writing these articles, he's in no way motivated to make these super concise and dense, because, that kind of implies that you have information you want to share, right? And that you're trying to fit a lot of information into a short text, which is something that I think journalists and, academics both do. If you don't have any information to share, then you're really not going to be trying to make short texts that are very dense. You're trying to pad it out, just like, say, somebody who's not faking a academic paper, but who is trying to stretch an academic paper, for a class or something, right? Where you just pad it out. And so that's what was happening here. And so in that sense, it's not surprising that it was less informationally dense. And that you're not using these long words that tend to convey more specific information. On the other hand, the other thing is that he was really rushed for time, and I guess academics know this too, but I'm sure it's true of newspaper writers, and that's that when you're trying to write concisely, that takes a lot of time. And so if you're really pressed for time, that means you're probably not doing a lot of proofreading of it. And, one of the main things that you do when you proofread, or at least that I do, and that lots of people do, is try to make it more concise, right? Try to cut words.
Yeah.
And one way we cut words, especially when we're working with word limits as opposed to, say, character limits, is by using these longer words. And that's the same reason why the pronouns are up, right? So pronouns get cut from concise writing in general, right? Pronouns are more common in conversation than they are in writing, and they're less common in really carefully written things, because, normally a pronoun is something you've done to link some entity across sentences, but, you can also compress those sentences through relative clauses and other types of noun modification, and then you don't need to keep repeating the pronoun over and over again. You do a lot less of that. So those are related features.
How about this one? Emphatics. And I guess these are intensifiers like really or very. There were more of them in the fake stories. What do you reckon?
Yeah. So I think it's two things. So I think again, it's related to the same point, and that is about concision and stuff. I mean, if you think about yourself when you're writing and trying to to edit things down, one of the things you do is you go through and you start dropping adverbs, right? I mean, it's sort of a standard advice for both journalism and academic writing and creative writing for that matter, right? Which is, things like adjectives and adverbs are kind of superfluous and therefore can often be cut. They're often also kind of editorializing a bit, and that these aren't editorial articles, so those often get cut as well. And so I think it's both of these things, right? So again, it's like if you're trying to make word limit in a short amount of time, which is what Jason Blair was doing, right? Trying to write as many articles as he could over a short period of time. And, these articles need to be of a certain length to be submitted. Then, use of adverbs in general and emphatics in particular are really useful, right? They're a way of padding up the text. You can add them in. You're not really putting in much more information. You're certainly not putting in any kind of information that required you to actually do any reporting. And so I think that's part of it. And you also, maybe just from the other perspective, you don't have as much time to go through and remove these from your text, right? So when he wrote the Real News and he was really, doing his best to really convey as much, all this information he had collected concisely, then, you could see him going through on a second read or whatever and removing these kind of words. I think the other thing is that, it's part of this idea that one of the reasons why, like I said, that newspapers, but also academic writers, creative writers tend to often remove adverbs and adjectives and stuff like that is that they're just not really, they're seen as sort of editorializing, right? Like you can think about an academic paper that has a lot of adverbs in it and often feels like it's pushing a bit hard. You know what I mean? Like it's sort of trying to force, it's taking, it's moving from the data you're analyzing and showing evidence that should be convincing someone of the argument you're making to trying to convince them sort of rhetorically through the use of adverbs to emphasize things. And so that's also, I think, happening there too. That is that he slips a bit into more of an editorializing or into an opinionated column style. And that's a bit of a tell, right? Because it's not an informative article, although it's presented as one. It's in some ways, it's also not really an opinion article either. But I think it's sort of that sort of bit of style creep there where he's reflecting this sort of lack of conviction or lack of confidence in what he's writing and sort of showing that this is kind of at best opinion.
It's like when somebody uses the word obviously in a paper and it's like,
right.
I'll decide if that's obvious or not.
Thank you exactly. Right. Yeah. And that person, it's obviously easier to say obviously than it is to try to concisely present more information that would help make the case. And often there is no more information to help make that case. And so I think that's happening in all of these contexts.
You can really feel the time pressure. Like as things go on, the clock keeps going. He's trying to keep things moving. He's running out of time. He's getting a lot of pressure. And this really comes out in the language.
Yeah, exactly right. And I mean, it was a known problem at the time at the New York Times. I think like I said, it was really, I think the kind of atmosphere in the newsroom was notoriously pressurized at the time. They were doing this thing where they had a kind of a policy where they would, I think I might have the term wrong, but it was something like they would flood the story, meaning that instead of assigning just one newspaper reporter to a case, or assigning newspaper reporters, I guess, to different parts of the case, to the story, if it was big enough to warrant it, they would just sort of send a bunch of reporters and have them essentially compete with each other.
Oh, wow.
In this sort of highly competitive environment. I mean, I think by Blair's his own story about it, which, we can believe or not believe, I suppose, but that this really increased the pressure. I think this is also all driven in part by just these newspapers scrambling in the early 2000s to really figure out how to position themselves with the rise of online news. And so this is one of the strategies, perhaps, was to do this flooding of these stories. But then that put a lot of pressure on people to, not just to get really big scoops and evocative information, which, you can kind of do by lying. And there is some evidence that he was doing this, like during the DC sniper trial that he was covering. He at one point said something like that, because of some kind of issue with the way they were interrogating the suspects, that they had blown that one of them was about to admit that they had done it and something happened there, and that was disputed by the FBI at the time. So that was, I think, a case where they're trying to kind of build a more exciting story. But the other way is just to write them really quickly, right? Like, I mean, if you're just writing these stories quicker than your competitors, your colleagues, then they're more likely to get picked up, right, and make the front page. And so, so there was just this real pressure to move quickly, and I think that's reflected across these features, actually.
And this pressure on newsrooms at the time is part of the story of fake news as well, because here they are having to compete with this new thing, the internet and online news. And some people were monetizing it better and some people were monetizing it worse. But it used to be that the New York Times and all these newspapers were the gatekeepers. There were publishers who would decide what was getting published. And suddenly everybody could publish. Everybody. And so then what happened was anybody with an agenda and enough time could put out a story that would work. And, you know, there's that saying that a lie can go halfway around the world before the truth has got its boots on. And this is the thing about misinformation, about disinformation, in the way you define it in the book, is that being willing to lie is an enormous advantage in the information marketplace.
Yeah, that's a good point.
With truth, you've got to be careful. It takes time to build it up. But if you're just willing to lie, you can make any number of lies. And if one gets caught, you've got plenty more. They're very cheap. They're easy to construct. You can get them out fast, so you control the narrative. And a lot of people just believe them anyway. So people are bad at thinking critically about stuff that they already believe. So there's a whole thing going on.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's different types of lies. I think some lies must take a really long time to construct. But you know what I mean? Like, I think it really depends on what the purpose of the lie is. Like, if you're really, I think that sometimes truth is easier than lies. I mean, we all kind of know this, right? Like, if you tell the truth, then you don't get caught. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you don't have to keep all your lies in your head, right? And you can, like, you know, that's kind of, you know, we've probably all had that situation where you tell a lie for some reason, and then later on you don't remember the lie you told, and gets revealed. I mean, this happens all the time. But I think you're right. You know, like, I think in Jason Blair's case that was certainly right, and that's what's happening here. That for him it was easier to lie about just kind of mostly, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say this, but, you know, often innocuous kind of things, right? Like lying about. Like, one of the examples we have there is he's lying about the view from the patio of a family he's interviewing whose daughter was captured in Iraq. And he's saying, well, you know, look at the tobacco fields out here. And, you know, in that case, you know, it was in Kentucky or something, so tobacco fields make sense. But there were no tobacco fields there. I don't think it was like he could have said anything at that point, right? He just picked what was easiest to say and said it. And so in the case like that, I think you're right. That in that case, it's really easy to lie. But in, you know, you can see in some kind of like high value, I don't know, like propaganda, political campaign that like really constructing these lies super carefully and really, for that matter, making the text itself as convincing as possible could be really harder than telling the truth. So I think that's, I guess, kind of the point we're trying to make in the book a bit, which is that like there's all these assumptions about that we can distinguish true from false and real from fake, but it's more about trying to figure out the motivation of the person for lying, and then how that would affect the language, and that should really depend a lot on the motivation and the circumstances in which they're lying.
Yeah. Now, fake news detection seems to require a lot of text to make it work, like in the work you discuss in the book. Can we scale this down to smaller things like a tweet so that we would be able to detect disinformation as a tweet? I remember you did some work once with shorter texts, notably the Bixby letter.
Yeah. Was
the letter to Mrs. Bixby done by Abraham Lincoln or by his assistant, John Hay?
Yeah.
Can we do this with shorter texts?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the problem with short text, right, is that you just get less information that you can work with, right? So, you know, like the kind of patterns that you were discussing there, like, you know, emphatics or pronouns or average word length. Like, I mean, I guess average word length is a good example, right? Like you have, I don't know, a 4-text tweet where one of the words is, you know, 15 characters long, then you would, based on that, not do a very good job of estimating the that person's real, like, kind of population average. You know what I mean? Like, so you know, maybe they have an average of 3.5 characters per word, but then, you know, if you have a four word tweet where one of the words is 15 characters long, then, you know, that's really gonna up the average and make it a pretty meaningless measure. So that's the real problem with these shorter texts, right? Is that you really break down in terms of what you can kind of measure there in a meaningful way. But I think there is stuff you can do with short text. I mean, the Bixby letter was one that we worked on that was a pretty short text, but it wasn't tweet short. It was like 100 and 38 words or something, if I recall. Actually, I never thought about it that way, but there was a certain level of deception in there, right? Because it wasn't written by Abraham Lincoln, but it was supposedly written by Abraham Lincoln. But no, the other one we did was a little while ago was one with Isabel Clark, who was a PhD student here under my supervision. She's now up at Lancaster, and we did a study on Donald Trump's tweets on the lead up to the 2016 election, and there we took. Analyzing tweets is tricky often. You often combine tweets, right? Like, say you take all the tweets, if you have tweets from Canada and tweets from America, then you can make comparisons across, large numbers of tweets. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But when you're working on an individual tweet level, it gets a little trickier, right? Because they are so short.
Yeah.
But in that case, what we did was we analyzed Trump's tweets, or the tweets from the Trump account. I think it was over about a 10-year period. I think he was there in 2008, and we ran it up to 2018 or something like that. And so we had, I don't know what it was, tens of thousands of tweets and over 100,000 tweets. I don't remember the detail. But we analyzed each one of them. Each one of them was analyzed individually, right? And what we could do there was really track on all sorts of different dimensions change in Trump's style over time. So we showed, for example, that not long before he officially declared that he was running for the Republican leadership and, by extension for the presidency, that a style of sort of self-promotional tweets really shot up. We showed, for example, that when he moved from the Republican primaries to the general election, that his tweets became more, sort of like the Jason Blair stuff, less informal, more informationally dense. That really happened. There was a real inflection point that happened there right when he was, when it was clear that he was going to win the Republican primary. And then at that point, his style shifted somewhat, presumably to kind of pivot towards the general election and try to attract independents through kind of less informal tweeting. And then also, like, for example, when the Access Hollywood tape came out, right, was thought to likely sink him at the time. This is about a month before the actual election. His Twitter style changed dramatically in all sorts of ways, including becoming much less engaged with external viewpoints and really kind of like closed in and started just focusing on his own viewpoints and things like that. And so I'm not sure. I mean, probably there is aspects of deception across all of that in a sense. But yeah, self-presentation, communicative intent. I don't know. I mean, is it deceptive to kind of to shift your message when you are trying to appeal to the larger electorate and not the Republican primary voters? I don't know if that's deceptive. I mean, it's presumably savvy, right, to do that. I mean, it seems to have been. I mean, at least it I mean, it's hard to know what worked and what didn't work and what was responsible for his success and what wasn't. But I think we could say at least that his... Or
self-presentation. I don't know. Is that deceptive?
Was that the style in which he tweeted and how it changed over time appears to have been motivated and at least didn't stop him from winning the primary and then the general election.
I was going to ask a really stupid question to close out. I was going to say, and this is a very 2016 way to approach this. What tips do you have for people who are trying to avoid fake news? And I realize that's a terrible question, because if you care about avoiding fake news, you're probably fine. People who are susceptible to fake news don't care about avoiding it. They devour it. We just found out from the Dominion lawsuit against Fox News that the people at Fox News knew they were lying to their viewers, but they couldn't just report things to them because they had a whole bunch of angry viewers who insisted that the network lie to them. They didn't want to hear anything about Arizona going for Biden in 2020.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, when people insist that they be lied to, how can we make people care about what's true?
Yeah.
Okay, that's another terrible question.
Well, I know. I mean, I guess one thing we think is important about this book, right, is that this is like unlike almost all fake news research you read, and I think, I alluded earlier to the fact this wasn't like the easiest thing to publish. This is fake news in the New York Times, right? So it's actually, at least within kind of like a mainstream perspective, it's on the other side from Fox News, right? I mean, there's obviously a lot to the left of the New York Times and a lot to the right of Fox News, And it's often on this periphery that fake news research focuses, and to an extent for good reason, right? Because there's clearly a lot of fake news coming out of the sort of fringes of the news media. But at the same time, like, this is the New York Times, right? And this is certainly not the most consequential piece of news that at least turned out to be untrue, whether it was purposeful or not. I mean, we know Blair was purposely deceiving people, but this is the same time as the New York Times was reporting that there was weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, right?
Yeah.
And so, that's really consequential fake news. That's arguably the most consequential piece of fake news in our lifetimes, as in it led to really sustained and long war that we're probably still feeling the effects of. And so, I mean, in some sense, this is an academic book, so to most academics, we probably all are pretty aware of fake news in the fringes and fake news in the right wing for sure. And we're not trying to in any way say that's not there. I mean, it's definitely there, and certainly online news makes this much worse in many ways. But this is really highlighting that there is fake news in the mainstream news, and it's only a theory, right? But the theory is in part that, at least in the case of Jason Blair, that this was reflecting the pressures of this changing news media landscape. So, I think what we should do is probably be skeptical of all news, which is, a really long-standing view in applied linguistics and discourse analysis and critical discourse analysis. I mean, critical discourse analysis has been around for a long time. I think we're in that tradition here, if not exactly using the same methodologies. But critical discourse analysis in the 80s and 90s, wasn't focusing on the fringe news media. It was focusing on the mainstream news media and how the mainstream news media, has all these vested interests and has all these biases that aren't really there to inform us. And so I think in general, we need to be really careful when reading all this news and be highly skeptical of all of it and really care about the motivations for why we're being given the news we're given and understand that these motivations, when there are real intent here behind, any level of sort of faking of news, that these things should have linguistic consequences. But I don't think it's an easy solution, right? I mean, like I said earlier, Jason Blair was writing fake news for at least 6 months. That's how long the investigation lasted. But it's clear that he was writing fake news before that, or that he was lying. And the New York Times' own editors couldn't catch this. And there's no reason to think that they were, they wanted to let it go or they turned a blind eye. I mean, like I said, they were flooding these stories, right? They had lots of reporters. It wasn't like they were, it isn't like it's hard for the New York Times to find reporters. They could have got other people. They obviously didn't benefit from the scandal. And there's not even a good motivation here for them to want to do it. I mean, one might think that in the case of the Iraq War and coverage there, that they were somehow motivated to, for political pressure or whatever, to lie or to not fully investigate something or to, whatever happened there. But there's no reason to think that they were in any way wanting Jason Blair to make up a story about going to West Virginia. They just wanted to go to West Virginia and cover it, right? And yet they couldn't spot this, right, themselves. And you would think they would be highly motivated to spot it. And these are, professional writers, professional editors, people who know a lot more about journalism and about writing than the vast majority of people, maybe pretty much everyone in the world, right? And they couldn't spot it. So I think it's actually kind of bleak, right?
It may seem bleak, but I think what I keep coming back to is that we've never needed skepticism more than we do now. That we've always been presented with disinformation. We've always been presented with fake news. We're going to keep getting it. The answer, I think, is more skepticism and not less.
Yeah, definitely. More skepticism, but I think many of us become more skeptical of information found online or certainly generated by large language models, just because of the massive amount of discussion that's been on exactly this.
The book is The Language of Fake News, available from Cambridge University Press. It is open source, so you can read it right now. There's going to be a link on our website, becauselanguage.com. I've been talking to Dr. Jack Grieve. Jack, how can people find out what you're up to?
You can find me on Twitter, or you can find my website online. Just type in my name, Jack Grieve. We always got lots of stuff going on, so we post it all on Twitter and we post it online.
All right. Well, hey, thanks, Jack, for talking with us today. This has been really fun.
Thanks, Daniel.
So word of the week time.
Word of the week time. Let's start with one from Pharaoh Cat. This one's a couple of weeks old, but it's still really good. Rapid unscheduled disassembly.
Rapid unscheduled disassembly. Okay. I don't know this for sure, but I have to guess this is some Musk bro euphemism for like spaceships blowing up.
Okay, you've got the right news story.
Okay.
But, in fact, the term goes back quite a bit farther than that.
Oh, is this a thing that's in engineering and has been for years?
It turns out it has. So the current story is that there was a rocket from SpaceX recently, Falcon 9. It was unmanned. It was massive. They were testing it to see if they could get it up in the air, land it, see what they could learn from it. Because if you can land a rocket, then you can use it again. You don't have to throw it away every time. Unfortunately, it lost too much hydraulic fluid and didn't land successfully. It went...
Exploded.
You did?
Exploded real good.
It was a big explosion. It was a rapid, unscheduled disassembly.
Very rapid. That's one of the most rapid unscheduled disassemblies it's possible to have, I think.
Instantaneous unscheduled disassembly, but then it would be an IUD, and that's already taken. Yeah. So this sounds like a huge euphemism, and it is, but it's not unique to SpaceX or Elon Musk. Now, I have to say thanks to Fiona on our Discord who helped us out by pointing me to a Stack Exchange article, really useful. People there found an instance in 1967, a publication called the MAC Flyer, which referred to unscheduled disassembly. So that's one thing. In 1970, there's a gun book, Gunner's Mate, which says, in this case, recoil may be accompanied by a rapid, this is a little different, rapid unintentional disassembly of the gun. So that's guns, not rockets. And then we got to rapid unscheduled disassembly. There are terms, however, in the New Scientist feedback column used to describe explosions. Fire is referred to as uncontrolled thermal event.
Yep.
Bursting is unplanned loss of containment. And a crash is deconstructive deceleration.
Those are all very fun euphemisms.
Another one that's fun, some people talk about Kerbal Space Program. They were like, is this a Kerbal Space Program thing? You've had some KSP knowledge, haven't you?
I do, yeah. I played KSP. I probably put, I don't know, that is the sort of game where anything below like 500 hours is child's play. And I am so squarely in child's play. I think I probably clocked like maybe 30, 40 hours in that game.
Wow, okay.
It is ferociously good way to teach people how orbital mechanics work.
Yeah. Easy to start, hard to master. Is that what we're talking?
Yeah, for sure. Like you can get your spaceship up there and orbiting, and then you realize the thing that is amazing about Kerbal Space Program is that for all of us who grew up post the space race with like internet in our homes and stuff, and like fucking landing on the moon, whatever. Like you play Kerbal Space Program and you go, holy shit, I can't believe they did that. That's so hard.
That's amazing. Well, there's a term in KSP which refers to crashing onto the moon or some surface of a planet. Lithobraking.
instead of what's the actual form? Like atmospheric braking. Yeah.
Yeah, not atmospheric. No, this is lithobraking, where lithos is rock, so you're crashing against the rocks. I've also seen ablative lithobraking, which the ablative part means away from. This is just continuing it's a fun space tradition, and the rocket wasn't a failure. They did learn things from it, and they're working on keeping going.
All right.
This one was suggested by Diego. Algo speak.
Okay.
This
is fun.
This isn't anything new.
Well, I assume this is to do with obviously algorithms, but see now these days, so many different facets of our world are sort of like built around the concept of algorithms that this could actually refer to a bunch of different stuff. This could be algo bro trading space. This could be like the algorithms that define who we are as human beings based on the social media that we consume. Like this, which one does this refer to?
So this is the one that we used to call Voldemorting. You say something different, you construct some kind of slang because you don't there's a number of reasons why you might use algo speak. It's because maybe you're saying something illegal in LGBT hostile areas.
Sorry. Okay. I think I know what this is. This is like in TikTok, you say unalive instead of kill.
Very good example. Instead of suicide.
Or you might say grape instead of rape.
Yeah, this is what we're talking about. And it's because you don't want something to get flagged automatically. That's why algo. More likely, you might be saying something about a controversial person or topic, and you don't want your mentions flooded with that person's stans or trolls.
Oh, yep. Okay, cool. Yep, interesting.
I think of it as kind of a form of boundaries. I want this conversation to go here, but I don't want it to go farther.
Well, sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's just so for instance, in TikTok, absolutely, like not wanting to get flooded by like some horrific fan space is a perfectly valid reason to want to do this. I think algorithmically, right, so much of this is just a person wants to have a meaningful discussion about, say, sexual assault, but because TikTok has so much content, they have to just strike things algorithmically. And so, of course, they're going to, well, not of course, but one of the things they will do is like, well, anyone who mentions rape is potentially going to be advocating rape, so we're just going to ban that content.
Yep.
Right. So it means, unfortunately, that having meaningful discussions about really important things can get a lot harder in these spaces as well.
And so they have to be coded a certain way so that it doesn't get searchable. So it doesn't get hunted down by people who are looking automatically, or it just doesn't get flagged.
It's so tricky, isn't it? Because a lot of the content creators I see do want their stuff to be searchable. They definitely, they're essentially advocates around things like domestic abuse or sexual assault or whatever it happens to be, and they want their message to get out there and go as far as it can, but then they have to operate in this system that it's a tricky space.
So there's different use cases around this stuff. Hey? So algo speak is one of those.
And just to be clear, I am absolutely not advocating that all of these places just turn all the switches off and just go, okay, we won't have any like algorithmic monitoring, whatever, because that would be terrible.
Yes, it would. But I wanted to give AlgoSpeak a thorough airing, so thanks to Diego. Oh, by the way, thanks also to Laura, who suggested this quite a while ago, and we're finally getting to it.
We got there, Laura. We finally got there.
I noticed this one a little while ago. An Einstein.
Oh, okay. I'm guessing it's not just a smart person.
No, it's not. We've all seen work by M.C. Escher. I've got a few books of M.C. Escher's artwork.
Sure. The hands drawing themselves, or the staircase that always goes up, that sort of thing.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff like that. But one of the things you'll find with Escher is these tiled things, these tessellations.
Ah, yeah. So it will start out as lizards, and then it will turn into like diamonds, like a diamond pattern, like a tiled diamond pattern, and then it'll go back to lizards and stuff.
Yeah, I know the exact one you're thinking of.
Yeah.
Or there'll be like angels and devils, and they'll tile in and they'll lock into each other. You take one shape or maybe two and you tile them so that they repeat over and over again. The thing about these things is that after a while, you'll get a repeat. It's like with the Frozen 2 wrapping paper that I see on kids' presents all the time. You take a hunk of that wrapping paper.
This is the most particular and bespoke reference, but
oddly specific.
Keep going.
Yes. You take a hunk of this Frozen 2 wrapping paper, and you can find a place where you can lay it over another piece of the wrapping paper.
Right, and then you get that really lovely, gratified feeling of it sort of disappearing into the seam, right? Because the pattern matches up perfectly.
It's exactly the same. Now, the question is, can you find a shape that tiles, but that will never repeat?
Oh, I mean, yes, surely, right? Like, so I imagine this is related, and we are so far outside the boundaries of my actual math knowledge, but I imagine this is related to the concept of like unstable three-dimensional shapes. Do you know what I mean by that? Like the ones that no matter which way, they will never really ever settle. They will like always want to find a new thing because they're just unstable no matter how they sit.
Oh, this is called the gum book. Yes, that's right.
And so I'm guessing this is just like a 2D version of that?
It's a 2D version of that. And people have wondered if you could find a shape like that in the 1970s. Sir Roger Penrose, you know, the Penrose Triangle. We have a Penrose Triangle in East Perth, you know.
Oh, yeah, the big statue thingy, yes.
The big triangle-y thing. You have to look at it a certain way, and it seems to be an impossible shape. It's really cool. Sir Roger Penrose found two shapes that could do it, but people wondered if you could do it in one, if you could find one stone, one shape or one stone. And
that would perfectly click into itself, creating a replicating tile, but that would never ever produce a wrappable seam.
A repeat. That's right.
Wow.
And it's called an Einstein because it's one stone. Einstein.
Oh, until right now, I did not know that's what Einstein's name meant.
I hadn't realized either until I noticed this article. Now, having said that, the Ein in Einstein could be one stone, or it could be in. It could be in stone. Somebody lived inside a stone enclosure.
Wow, okay.
Anyway,
there you go.
The article comes from the New York Times, and it's about one David Smith, a self-described shape hobbyist of Bridlington in East Yorkshire, who has done the work and found, along with the help of some mathematicians who proved it was so, an Einstein. The first one.
Okay, cool.
Did it in one.
Did it in one. This poor guy has probably sat in his garage for years, and you're just like, did it in one.
Cut the paper, cut it up in little shapes, used a computer.
So what does it look like?
It looks like a little hat made up of 8 tiny kites. Take a little kite shape.
Okay.
Drop them next to each other in the way that they look like a hat. It's not symmetrical.
Okay.
But if you tile an infinite area with it, it never repeats.
Can you drop this into our Discord? I want to see what you're talking about. I'm really struggling to picture it.
Okay, you can open up the run sheet now and take a look at the link. It's there. And by the way, this is on our website, becauselanguage.com. I made it a shareable link so that even though it's behind a paywall, you can still read it because it's our gift and the New York Times' gift to you.
Oh, okay. How would you...
It's not a very appealing hat, is it?
How would you describe this shape?
A lumpy hat.
Do you know... Okay, what it looks like is one of those... You know how there's paint by numbers?
Mm-hmm.
There's also origami by numbers?
Yes.
This looks like an unfolded origami by numbers shape.
Yeah, it kind of does.
So you've got kind of pokey outy bits here and there, and they're all sort of joined together. Like you said, kite shapes is the perfect description, all glumped together to make a... I don't know. I guess it kind of looks like a horse. No matter what we say, when someone goes and looks at it, they're going to be like, wow, that description was terrible.
It's hard, radio's a visual medium, podcasting.
Such a great thing for a podcast show. That's cool. Someone made an Einstein. Wicked.
It is cool. The one catch, some of the tiles are reflections. You have to flip the hat to make it work. But apparently in topology circles, it still counts. So
yeah, right. Okay. Cool.
It's an Einstein, not related to the physicist, but to one stone.
Fun.
Finally.
Is that our words of the week? No, we got one more.
Got one tiny one more. Ferrocat suggested microdosing.
Okay. So in relation to the thing that is microdosing, or microdosing as a word being used in a new and different way?
Well, let's see. We know that microdosing is taking a tiny amount of a drug to, I don't know, get used to it, or why do you microdose?
This is so... I love when you're Mormon shows. This is so cute.
I only do caffeine. That's the thing.
Yeah. So microdosing is a practice of varying levels of evidentiary support that is supposed to sort of afford you some of the benefits of psychoactive drugs. So for some people with mental illness, this might be like a decreased level of anxiety or something like that. Or I have also heard of it or seen articles talking about people using it in terms of ways to sort of get more mental labor out of themselves. So maybe being more creative or being more sort of able to work longer, that sort of thing.
Right,
but
okay.
The key here is, though, the micro bit is sort of taking small amounts small enough that you don't get high in the traditional sense, because you want to be able to go into the world and function, and you don't want to head to work tripping balls on acid. So you gotta play with the amount.
Play with the quantity. Okay. Well, this is extending itself semantically a little bit. Here's the quote from a Tumblr blog that Ferrocat showed us: microdosing on living in a different time zone than my partner by simply having a completely different sleep schedule than him.
This is my life.
Are you microdosing time zones?
I am thoroughly microdosing time zones. My partner is an inveterate night owl, and I am a infuriating early riser, and we basically exist in different worlds.
That's great. I have realized that even though I don't want to go to bed when my partner goes to bed, I think it is better for me not to be as night owly as I might be. So
also, I think there's also an argument to be made about one of the two partners just like giving in and adopting the other one just so they don't have to live in different time zones anymore.
Yeah. But this microdosing usage seems to be something like doing something as with microdosing a drug, doing something a little bit, doing it incrementally just to give you some kind of effect. Microdosing.
There we go.
So, rapid unscheduled disassembly, algo speak, Einstein, and microdosing are words of the week. Let's get a comment from Franco via email, hello@becauselanguage.com, about the weird contractions that we use all the time, but that we never see in print. And when you see them in print, you go, oh, no, don't care for that at all. Franco says, here are a couple of fun contractions to add to the list you shared in the latest bonus episode. She'd of.
Oh, that's a good one. She would have.
It's got 2 apostrophes. Yep.
She'd have.
And a favorite in the southern U.S., y'all'd of.
Oh, that is tasty.
Yeah.
That is. What are we? Hang on.
Y'all'd of.
I'm doing a mental count here. That's 3 apostrophes.
Yes, it is. You all would have. And
wow.
you can go farther. And we did play with this a little bit. This is not the first appearance of Yaldov on the show. I remember it during the Talk the Talk years. You can go back and search for that on our website, talkthetalkpodcast.com.
Yaldov, what a great one.
Franco says, gotta love the South's solution to the lack of a plural U in English.
Y'all and yous. Yous is not obviously from the American South.
No, it's more northern, isn't it? But it's stigmatized in a way that y'all really isn't. A big thanks to Dr. Jack Grieve for the chat about his work. Thanks to everybody who gave us ideas for the show. Lots of you, aren't there? Thanks to the team from Speech Docs who transcribes all the words, our patrons who support the show and keep us going. And thanks to you, Ben, for joining me today.
Oh, stop it. Hey, if you are listening and you like the show, you can do some things other than just listen to us. You can send us ideas and feedback. We build a lot of the show off the labour of our listeners. You can follow us on Because Lang Pod on all of the social spaces. You can leave us a message with SpeakPipe where you can actually literally leave us an actual vocal message and we'll play it on the show. You can send us an email, hello@becauselanguage.com. You can tell a friend about us. The very coolest thing anyone can do is tell a friend about a good podcast they enjoy. And of course, you can become a patron. You'll get bonus episodes like the mailbag episode that we just did, which are really, really fun. You can hang out with us on Discord, which is also really, really fun. And when I say us, I don't just mean me, Daniel, and Hedvig. I mean the whole Discord listenership patron space. We've got some really cool fans in there, and you could also be a really cool fan in there. And if you become a patron, you're making it possible for Speech Docs to make transcripts of our shows and try and render the nonsense that I say readable and searchable. Speech Docs? Speech Docs. Real talk for a second.
Docs.
I'm sorry. I'm just so sorry for all of the me that you've had to transcribe. You're doing the Lord's work. Thank you so much.
They like it. You know, they liked your word from last time. Hey, you know what, Ben?
What?
I would like to give a shout out to our top patrons, so I'm going to do it. All of them. All the top ones. Here we go. Istin, Termi, Elias, Matt, Whitney, Helen, Jack, Ferrocat, Lord Mortis, Grammar Yen, Larry, Christopher, Andy, James, Nigel, Meredith, Kate, Nasrin, Joanna, Aisha, Steele, Margaret, Manu, Roger, Rianne, Colleen, Ignacio, Sonic, Snedgehog, Kevin, Jeff, Andy from Logophilius, Stan, Kathy, Rosh, Cheyenne, Felicity, Amir, The Canny Archer, Tim, Alyssa, Chris, Laurie, Angry Balls, the balls of anger, and our newest patrons at the listener level, Carla, and at the friend level, Sam and Tig. Thanks once again to all of our great patrons. Our theme music has been written and performed by Drew Koplyanov, who's a member of Ryan Bino and Avidian's Bible. Thanks. Do you want to say this part together? Because Hedvig's not here.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. Thanks for listening.
Oh, we'll catch.
I don't think we'll be able to do it with the... We'll try again. Okay?
Okay.
3,
Thanks for
2. I'm going to count us in, Daniel. Are you ready?
Yep.
3, 2, 1. Thanks for listening.
We'll catch you next
time because language.
language.
That was fucking terrible.
That was worth it.
That was so bad. Okay. Well, that was good. Finishing on a strong note. Love that for us.
Yep.